Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hey there.
We take your sources, the articles, the research, your notes, whatever you've got, and we dive deep to pull out the most important nuggets, the key insights.
Right. Think of it as a shortcut, really, getting you the surprising facts and the core understanding you need, without feeling completely overwhelmed.
And today, we've got a really compelling deep dive lined up. It's actually tailored specifically for you, the listener, who share this material with us.
That's right. We're looking at an advanced copy of a new book from our partners at Bald and Bonkers Network, LLC.
The book's called A Pardon of Love and War by Michael Wisner.
And our source material is basically excerpts from an interior preview, so an advanced copy giving us a pretty good look inside.
Exactly. So our mission here is to examine this book, dig into the plot and the key themes that jump out from the pages you send, and really guide you through what seems significant.
And it definitely sets up quite a journey, doesn't it? Starts with this digital connection, but then it heads somewhere much more profound and, frankly, pretty devastating.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. Where does the story kick off, according to these excerpts? It starts online.
Yes, exactly. The book introduces Michael and Vika. They meet on some kind of digital platform, and the source material is quite upfront about its initial nature transactional, primarily for sex work.
Which is quite a starting point for a connection, but what seems clear pretty fast is that it evolves, right? Way beyond that.
Totally. The text mentions her reply arriving sooner than expected. And crucially, it wasn't just like a quick note. It was thoughtful, articulate, and surprisingly personal.
Okay. So that's the first clue. This isn't just business as usual on that platform.
Precisely. It seems like Vika's willingness to be a bit vulnerable right away, maybe hinting her circumstances weren't the whole picture, really struck a chord with Michael.
Makes sense.
And from there, things build quickly. It moves from just messages to hours of conversation, really sharing thoughts, feelings, experiences.
It sounds like they built a whole shared world just through screens. The sources talk about shared interests, melancholic jazz, classical music, debating art interpretations, sharing articles and books.
Yeah, like a real intellectual and emotional bond was forming.
And the vulnerability, too. That seems key.
Oh, absolutely. The text mentions them delving into darker subjects. So Michael talks about his loneliness and inadequacy. And Vika opens up about financial pressures, a challenging upbringing, even her dream of being an art historian.
Wow. So that mutual vulnerability, that's what creates this intimacy that transcended the digital barrier, as the book puts it.
Right. It calls it a bond forged not just in shared interests, but in mutual vulnerability and understanding. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Showing real connection can happen anywhere.
And that's when Michael starts feeling that pull, that desire to visit her, to see her world.
Exactly. Eastern Europe, this small town described as having rich history and culture, but also facing struggles. He wants to experience it.
The little details really sell it, like listening to the same song simultaneously.
Or sharing playlists. Yeah, those little things build a sense of, being together even when you're apart.
And it wasn't all serious, right? The excerpts mention humor.
Thankfully, yes. They talk about laughing at awkwardness, their struggles, digital fumbles, sharing memes, inside jokes, silly videos. It feels real.
Humanizes the whole digital thing.
And their virtual dates apparently evolved into these sprawling late-night conversations. The screen becomes less of a barrier and more like a window into each other's souls.
That's a great description. And those vivid details, Vika showing photos.
Yeah, childhood pictures, family, and that one detail about her grandmother's hands crafting lace. So evocative.
And sharing a video of her making borscht.
Right. These aren't just pixels. They're glimpses into a life lived authentically. She's inviting him in.
It really paints a picture of how deep their connection got, all starting from that unlikely place.
But, the sources quickly signaled that things don't stay peaceful. Shadows start gathering.
Right. The book uses that phrase, unseen shadows gathering, and mentions growing unrest in her country. That digital bubble they built starts to feel fragile.
The first signs were apparently subtle. Vika's messages get less frequent. Her responses are delayed. She starts mentioning political tension, escalating conflict, maybe carefully at first.
You can feel the shift. The text says Michael sensed a growing anxiety in her words, that he could almost hear a subtle tremor in her voice, even digitally.
And that feeling he got from her was backed up by the news he was seeing about increasing political instability in her region. He starts connecting the dots.
Like her silences or the subtle changes, he noticed a slight tremor, hesitation, that subtle exhaustion.
Yeah, he links those to things like power outages or internet disruptions that were happening at the same time as news reports of escalating tensions, skirmishes, protests.
So the real-world conflict is literally bleeding into their connection, creating this growing sense of unease.
And eventually she can't shield him from it anymore. Vika confesses the true nature of the situation. Checkpoints, soldiers patrolling, constant fear.
Oh, man.
Her family's making desperate attempts to leave. There's a growing number of refugees. The book paints this really harrowing picture, mentioning faint sirens in the background during a call, the raw fear in her eyes on screen.
So that distance between them, which was just physical miles before, it becomes something else entirely.
Right, an insurmountable distance measured in fear and uncertainty. And Michael, back in his comfortable life, feels this awful helplessness, a profound sense of inadequacy.
Stuck while she's in danger.
Exactly. And the fear of losing her becomes this palpable presence for him. The book makes it crystal clear. This digital romance, born on a sex work platform, is now facing the ultimate test, the harsh, unforgiving realities of war.
And their future just feels shrouded in an ominous and uncertain darkness. Wow.
Yeah, and that directly leads into the desperate things Michael starts doing next, according to the sources.
Right, when communications just drop off.
And
His messages aren't just messages now, they're a lifeline. This tenuous thread he's hanging on to.
And the gaps between any possible response get longer, just agonizing silences.
He tries everything, right? Trying to call, gets silence, sending message after message. Those desperate pleas, he's just echoing, "Are you okay? Please respond." We've all felt that panic.
Totally. And that digital world that brought them together now becomes his search tool. He's frantically scrolling social media, searching forums, social media groups linked to her city, her job, her interests.
Even news comments. Wow. Reaching out to people from her online network.
Yeah, strangers who suddenly become potential allies in his mind. Anything to find a trace of her.
And the toll this takes, the excerpts describe it vividly. Days bled into nights, hope and despair just blurring. Sleep evaded him, haunting nightmares.
That heavy weight of fear, the reality of her situation, it threatened to break him.
He doesn't just stay online, though. He reaches out wider.
Right. To contacts, friends, colleagues, even official channels, embassies, international organizations, the Red Cross, giving them any scrap of information he has on Vika, just hoping someone can help.
And then there's a shift. That weight of his helplessness,
Right.
It pushes him.
Exactly. He realizes sitting there isn't enough. He had to act. He needed a plan, a real plan to get her out.
Okay, so he actually starts planning an escape.
Yeah. The book details it. He's poring over news reports, maps, online info about escape routes, researching treacherous mountain passes, overcrowded refugee camps, these perilous journeys.
Fully aware of the risks. Violence, capture, death.
Absolutely. He knows the dangers. And then there are the practical hurdles. Money. Huge obstacle.
Right.
He's liquidating savings, selling his car, getting family help. It's an immense financial burden, but that's secondary.
And travel itself sounds like a nightmare. Canceled flights, closed borders, chaos.
He spends countless hours on the phone fighting red tape, dealing with constant delays. It sounds exhausting.
Does he have a specific strategy?
Yes. Get her to a neighboring country that has a strong international presence, somewhere she might be able to seek asylum. He researches the options meticulously.
And he builds a network for this.
He does. Reaches out to old university friends now working in NGOs, connects with journalists, human rights advocates. His digital world transforms again, becoming a weapon, a tool in this desperate fight.
Okay, so he puts all this together, makes the journey himself, waiting at the meeting point.
Yeah. Envisioning her arrival, picturing seeing her again.
But she's not there.
No. Just the crushing weight of failure, it's brutal.
The aftermath sounds awful. Numb disbelief, just wandering the deserted streets. The city is a graveyard of hopes and dreams for him.
He keeps searching for a bit, sifting through rubble, calling her name, just futile.
And that unbearable loss then fuels, what, a new mission.
Exactly. Investigating her death. He spends weeks in the city, traversing ravaged streets, talking to survivors, interviewing anyone who might know something. He needs to know what happened.
And this is where he uncovers the really devastating truth.
Right. As presented in the source material, Vika's death wasn't accidental. It wasn't just chaos. It was a deliberate, targeted drone strike.
And the official reports.
A lie, covering up a far more sinister truth.
Wow. So his personal quest slams right into this horrifying systemic reality.
Exactly. And confronting that truth, not just about her death, but the nature of the conflict, it changes everything for him.
Absolutely. The book describes how he decides to volunteer in Vika's hometown after finding that out. It felt like an inexorable pull, it says.
Yeah, and he's pretty honest about it. His grief was a passport, his desperation a qualification. He wasn't pretending it was pure altruism at first. He was seeking purpose.
Understandable. And arriving there,
Yeah.
it's described as stepping into a nightmare.
Completely. A landscape of devastation. Buildings like skeletal frames, streets full of rubble, the air thick with smoke and decay. Just awful.
And the sounds.
Yeah.
You mentioned that detail earlier. It wasn't the loud explosions that got to him most.
No. The book says the sounds in the city were different, somehow more terrifying. The whimper of a wounded dog, a cough of a dying man, the soft sob of a mother holding her dead child. Those quiet sounds of suffering hit harder.
That's heavy. And he sees specific things.
Yeah.
Human stories.
Yeah. Heartbreaking vignettes. A young girl clutching a tattered doll, her eyes wide and vacant, showing this depth of sorrow. She just takes breath silently. And he sees reflections of Vika in her eyes.
Oh, wow. But amidst that horror, there were also signs of resilience.
Definitely. The sources make sure to highlight that. Glimmers of resilience, sparks of hope, the unwavering determination of parents, neighbors, helping neighbors, little acts of kindness.
Like the group of women rebuilding their community center.
Yeah, or the young doctor, Irina, providing care with almost nothing. These moments stand out.
And these observations tie into the book's larger point about the human cost of war, right? Standing against terms like collateral damage.
Precisely. It forces you to see the individual faces, the real suffering behind the abstract terms.
The book also mentions the psychological impact, PTSD.
Yes, it doesn't shy away from that. The nightmares, flashbacks, constant anxiety, the isolation, the deep-seated fear and pervasive distrust that permeate everything.
And the aid organizations, are they effective?
Present, yes, but described as struggling, limited resources. The sheer scale of the suffering just surpasses what they can do. It highlights a desperate need for more funding, logistical support, better collaboration.
And while he's there, volunteering, he's still investigating Vika's death.
He is. He's poring over reports, trying to find actual eyewitness accounts.
And this confirms his initial finding, that the strike was deliberate.
It does, and it deepens it. It was part of a systematic targeting of civilians, the book argues, cloaked in the language of national security. The truth was horrifying because it was intentional.
The book mentions an Anya, different from the therapist.
Right, a local woman. She shared her story and showed him a photograph of her granddaughter, Svetlana, who apparently looked a lot like Vika and was a close friend.
And someone named Elena provides key info.
Crucial info. Elena confirms Vika was actively involved in aid work, helping distribute supplies, comforting the wounded, and that she was collaborating with Svetlana on projects helping families, providing shelter.
And Svetlana, she was killed in the same strike.
Yes, the same drone strike.
So these survivor accounts all point the same way, intentional targeting.
Consistently. They described strikes hitting civilian areas with devastating precision, not random collateral damage.
So Michael realizes Vika's death wasn't random violence, it was calculated, part of this larger tapestry of systematic violence.
Exactly, and his grief gets mixed with this intense, righteous anger.
He tried official channels first, like the police.
Yeah, but their records were inadequate, chaotic. So he turned to unofficial channels, aid workers, volunteers, local people. They had the real story.
And they described Vika's volunteering.
Yeah, consistently. Frequently volunteering her time and energy, providing basic medical supplies, emotional support. It came from a real place of compassion.
There's that detail about a clandestine network delivering aid.
Right. One woman described Vika being part of that, called her resourceful and brave. Said she was even trying to get a young child to safety right before.
Wow. So these stories painted a picture of Vika that went way beyond just the digital person he knew.
Absolutely. Revealed this compassionate soul committed to helping others.
His investigation takes him to the outskirts, through dangerous areas.
Yes, navigating treacherous streets, dodging rubble, always alert to danger.
And that's where he finds the pattern.
The chilling pattern, yeah. Drone strikes targeting aid workers. Not just Vika, but others. Described as a systematic effort to eliminate support. A deliberate strategy to break the spirit of resistance.
So Vika became a casualty of that strategy. A victim of her own unwavering compassion.
That's how the book frames it, a casualty of this callous campaign.
So the insight here is witnessing the raw human cost, and uncovering this terrifying truth that compassion itself was being targeted, that her death was deliberate.
Exactly. It's a double blow, and that confrontation with intentional cruelty on top of the grief really shapes everything that follows.
So when Michael finally returns home, the contrast must have been immense.
Totally jarring. The Chicago tarmac, the crisp autumn air, it felt alien, like the world was just carrying on, oblivious to the profound loss he was carrying.
And the grief doesn't just vanish. The book describes it coming in waves.
Yeah, waves crashing over him. He keeps going back to that digital memorial he made for Vika, adding photos, videos, bits of writing, like an act of remembrance, almost keeping her alive there.
And meanwhile, the legal battles start. But it's slow.
Very slow. A grinding process, full of bureaucratic hurdles, frustrating delays, no quick answers here. But the fight itself changes, doesn't it? It becomes less personal.
It does. The book shows it shifting. Less about personal revenge for Vika, more strategic, about establishing a precedent, holding those responsible accountable, trying to prevent similar tragedies.
That makes sense. The emotional toll must be huge, but knowing it could contribute to a larger cause probably fuels him.
Absolutely. And this is where therapy comes in, Dr. Anya Sharma.
Right. The book describes the setting, the sterile office, that faint smell of lemon and old paper, and his trauma, the nightmares, seeing Vika, then the strike flash, the silence.
And Dr. Sharma gives him a diagnosis.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. She explains his brain is trying to process everything he saw and experienced, and the flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts are symptoms of that struggle.
Hearing that must have been significant, realizing the depth of the wound.
Yeah, the book says it hit him hard, understanding it was this deep, pervasive wound.
So he starts working on coping mechanisms, breathing exercises, mindfulness.
Exactly. Recognizing triggers, self-care, exercise, and importantly, reconnecting with writing as an outlet, channeling it somewhere.
That's a long road, right? Not easy.
Definitely not. An arduous road to recovery. But he finds a way forward. The memories, the PTSD, they're part of him, but they no longer define him. That's the key shift.
And his personal healing connects to his purpose, helping other victims.
Yes, powerfully. He uses his network to help other victims of drone strikes, connecting families with legal aid, advocacy groups, mental health resources.
And sharing his own story.
Right. Using his experience to inspire others, to break down the silence. He starts giving lectures, joining panel discussions, writing articles for humanitarian outlets.
So the legal battle and the advocacy merge.
They become intertwined, less about personal revenge, more about establishing precedent, creating accountability, preventing future tragedies.
Well, the book emphasizes his newfound inner strength, resilience, determination, learning the legal system, becoming an advocate.
Right. His life has changed forever, the scars are there, but they don't define him. Healing is a lifelong journey, and he's finding meaning in the tragedy.
And the computer, that symbol of connection and loss, it transforms again.
It does. It becomes a tool for connection in a new way, building bridges, fostering empathy with other victims, other advocates. He's actively transforming pain into purpose, grief into action.
He finds allies, too. Like a human rights lawyer.
Yes, a seasoned lawyer who becomes a mentor.
Yeah.
Her belief in him as a potential force for change is described as really crucial for his healing.
And media attention eventually comes, despite initial reluctance.
It does. His blog becomes a platform, then articles, interviews, documentaries. He learns to channel the anger and grief constructively.
And through this activism, he finds community.
A real sense of it. Connecting with other families who lost loved ones, sharing stories, finding strength in collective sorrow. This bond forged in tragedy brings warmth and mutual understanding.
It sounds like he's balancing a lot.
Right.
The legal fight, the healing, the advocacy.
Definitely. Moments of despair are still there, the book notes, but the work itself gives him structure, a path forward.
So the core insight here seems to be how someone can take unimaginable loss and trauma and channel it into this incredibly powerful force for advocacy, healing, and connection, finding purpose as a way to survive.
Exactly. And building on that, the book really digs into this idea of digital legacy. For Michael, creating Vika's legacy online isn't just about remembering her. It's therapy, yes, but it's also a way to fight against anonymity and disposability. Her story needed to be told.
Her digital presence becomes complex, a paradoxical gift. Reminds them of the loss, but it's also a lifeline to who she was.
And the sources circle back to the ethical minefield around digital sex work. It's portrayed as more than just transactions. It's this complex tapestry involving exploitation, vulnerability, but also, as in their case, potentially genuine connection. Vika's story forces a look at the systemic issues.
Beyond the digital memorial, he sets up something tangible, a scholarship fund.
Yes, a small scholarship fund in her name for young women in her hometown to get an education, a legacy rippling outwards. The book describes setting it up as deeply fulfilling despite all the bureaucratic hurdles and fundraising.
But doing this while the war is still going on, that must have been incredibly hard.
Extremely. Access difficult and dangerous, complex logistics, fighting bureaucratic inertia. He apparently questioned if it was even worthwhile sometimes, like clinging to a fantasy of control.
The book revisits love in the digital age too, right? The irony of their connection.
Yeah, how profound and real it felt, yet forged across screens. That intimacy defied limitations, but the distance and the reliance on mediated communication made it so vulnerable.
The war cruelly exposed this fragility, leaving him grappling with text limits and the irreplaceable value of genuine human connection. Physical presence was the crucial, irreplaceable element.
And this fragility is amplified by the ethical complexities of technology in the conflict itself. The same tech that connected them, internet platforms, were also instruments of war drones, surveillance.
Which amplified power imbalances, allowed violence with unprecedented precision.
Right. So the book explores the ethical implications of militarized technology, how it can exacerbate inequalities, create new forms of exploitation.
So the quest for justice for Vika becomes linked to this larger fight for ethical practices online and in conflict.
Inseparable, the book argues. Her memory fuels his determination to make a difference. Her digital ghost, as the book puts it, demands attention to these bigger issues.
So his personal search becomes a search for a deeper understanding of the digital age itself.
Yeah. Reconciling its potential for connection and compassion with its capacity for exploitation and violence. Seeing the digital world as a reflection of humanity, challenging us to use technology responsibly. Vika's legacy is the catalyst.
The sources mention humanitarian groups using tech for good too. Social media, VR.
They do, but the book quickly points out the double-edged sword. Tech aids efforts, but there's potential for misuse data exploitation, blurring lines between aid and exploitation. Communication tools becoming tools for surveillance and control.
Like Michael's own experience, mirrored anonymity fostering connection and vulnerability.
Exactly. It highlights the urgent need for a critical reassessment of tech ethics.
The book broadens out too, doesn't it, to the politics of war generally.
Yes, drawing on Michael's observations. Chaotic aid efforts, lack of coordination, corruption, sanctions having unintended consequences on civilians. It argues for a broader approach addressing the political, economic, social roots of conflict.
And diplomacy is key.
Presented as the most effective tool, requiring empathy, patience, understanding, impartial mediation, and the need for early intervention mechanisms.
There's a big focus on technology and warfare, though, the language used.
Right. How sanitized language like collateral damage masks the brutal reality. It details the proliferation of advanced weaponry, cluster bombs, drones.
And the remote nature of drone strikes.
Seen as stripping the act of killing of its humanity, Vika's death becomes the epitome of this dehumanization.
Raising huge ethical questions. Misidentification, psychological detachment of operators.
Inadequacy of legal frameworks, erosion of state sovereignty. The core argument is tech is outpacing ethics and law. Human rights get trampled.
So a call for global reassessment, especially on lethal autonomous weapons, AWS.
Urgently needed, the book stresses. And it frames it as a moral and ethical decision, not just a technical one.
It touches on information warfare too. Propaganda, misinformation.
Briefly, yeah. How it erodes trust, fuels division, complicates diplomacy, helps extremism.
But there's a flip side. Technology and peace building.
A more hopeful angle. Using tech for dialogue, understanding, trust secure platforms for negotiation, even using AML for early warning systems, analyzing data for potential escalations, enabling proactive response.
Still challenges, though, the digital divide. Ethical concerns about surveillance?
Absolutely. Balancing prevention and freedom remains tricky.
So the takeaway here is really about how technology is fundamentally changing connection and conflict, raising urgent ethical questions we need to grapple with.
Precisely. And that leads directly into how storytelling and legacy building become tools for navigating all this, as the final sections explore.
Right. The power of storytelling. Michael realizes using survivors' narratives is key to challenging those sanitized versions of war, creating empathy, advocating.
He starts creating short vignettes, sharing them online. Writing becomes a vehicle for change, a catalyst for empathy, an advocacy tool.
And it works, gets a positive response.
According to the text, yes. Donations, volunteers, pressure on governments. Storytelling transcends boundaries, creates human connection, compels action, transforms statistics into real people.
And collecting these stories, he sees patterns: trauma, inequality, lack of accountability.
Yeah, which leads him to write a comprehensive report, synthesizing the narratives, using them as evidence for needed systemic changes.
Then comes the initiative for a global day of remembrance that faced challenges.
Big challenges: skepticism, bureaucracy, indifference, people arguing it was divisive or too soon.
But he persevered.
He did, and remarkably, the UN officially recognizes a global day of remembrance, not just for mourning, but reflection, learning lessons, celebrating resilience, committing to prevent future violence, a beacon of hope.
Wow. So storytelling becomes legacy, a blueprint for the future, a collective commitment not to forget.
Exactly.
When he returns to America again, still surreal, grief still there, but now mixed with purpose.
Right. Vika's death ignited this fire to ensure her story and others are not silenced.
Advocacy becomes central, using stories as evidence, working with NGOs, talking to policymakers, pushing for peace building over military intervention. Storytelling is political activism.
He acknowledges how humbling it is, though. The scale of the problem, political inertia, doubt. But the faces, the courage, the hope of the villagers keep him going.
And his efforts go beyond just exposure, towards reconciliation.
Yes. Organizing storytelling workshops in the region. Creating spaces for dialogue, healing, community building. Acts of reclamation, empowerment, collective healing.
His work evolves, becomes more encompassing: celebration of life, cultivation of peace.
Broadens to healing, reconciliation, education. He even brings trauma recovery workshops back to America, finding the techniques resonate widely.
Empathy is still core, though. Listening, recognizing dignity, sharing stories.
Especially listening to women sharing stories of loss, but also resilience, hopes, determination, that shared humanity.
Forgiveness is explored, too, as a path to healing.
Yeah, releasing anger, reclaiming peace, a gradual process, and collective healing requiring acknowledgement, addressing injustice, dialogue.
That digital archive he started, it evolves, too.
From just memory to a platform for dialogue, understanding, healing. With tools for sharing experiences, discussions on forgiveness, connecting people, expanding reach, translating stories, a space for victims to find solace and demand accountability.
And policy advocacy continues. Stricter drone regulations. Accountability.
Yes, using writing to humanize victims and expose indifference.
He continues therapy, seeing it as a slow process.
A slow, deliberate process, confronting demons, learning to live with memories. His therapist helps him see grief as a testament to love, something to honor, not be consumed by.
So he learns to live with Vika's memory as a celebration and starts a foundation.
Yes, a foundation in her name, supporting women in conflict zones. Education, healthcare, economic opportunities. A living memorial, a symbol of hope.
The digital archive keeps growing. Tools for conflict resolution, mediation.
Becoming a hub for collaboration, a global network of support.
Healing isn't linear, the book notes. Bad days happen.
But those become reminders of life's fragility, the urgency of his mission. He finds solace in the work.
And the archive becomes an educational tool in schools.
Yeah, ensuring the human cost and paths to healing are taught.
The focus shifts towards long-term rebuilding, documenting reconstruction, rehabilitation, reconciliation.
Stories of resilience become key to that educational piece.
The epilogue mentions encounters that broaden his view. Fatima in Syria, Joseph in DRC.
Right. Showing resilience isn't just individual survival, but rebuilding lives, communities, societies. His writing shifts, too, complementing raw accounts with narratives of hope and resilience, seeking stories of enduring, adapting, overcoming.
So if we step back and look at the whole journey in these excerpts, it's quite something. From that fragile digital connection shattered by war, through this relentless quest for truth, ending up dedicating his life to healing, advocacy, peace building, honoring the love he lost.
Yeah, the central conflict really feels like that collision. Our digital world capable of intense intimacy slamming against the harsh reality of war, and then the complex human response to that kind of devastating loss.
It weaves together so many huge themes: the depth of connection possible online, the dehumanizing horror of modern war, the systemic failures, technology's double-edged role, human resilience, finding purpose in grief.
It really does. Which leaves us with a pretty significant question, I think, based on everything we've unpacked from these excerpts of A Pardon of Love and War.
What's that?
Well, what does this book challenge you, the listener, to think about regarding your own digital connections? What ethical responsibilities might we all have in a world where conflict is increasingly shaped not just by the tech that connects us, but the tech used for violence? And how do we personally move beyond just seeing headlines and statistics to truly confront, understand, and maybe even respond to the individual human cost of conflict?